The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 10 a.m. and we have a great show lined up for you today. Can we really afford the price of unnecessary workplace stress? According to a 2015 Harvard University study published in the journal Management Science, more than 120,000 deaths a year may be due to stress at work, resulting in approximately 5 to 8% of annual healthcare costs. Author, activist, revolutionist, philanthropist, and management advisor Andrew Faas believes the staggering toll on workers can be avoided with education and better management practices. That's why he's drawn on his experience as a professional problem solver and a former target of irrational corporate bullying to write the book From Bully to BullsEye, Move Your Organization Out of the Line of Fire. Andrew will be joining us very, very shortly to do a deep dive into his new book, as well as other current topics when it comes to bullying in the workplace and in the corporate environment. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. If you are a longtime listener of the show, you know we always use the first few minutes of the show to tell you just a little bit about what's going on here in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. Well, we are here in April, and if you've been listening, you've heard me talk up Houston Money Week all year since January, really. We've been preparing for April Financial Literacy Month for, I think we started in October of last year. And so it's hard to believe we're already here. But we kicked off on April 1st, Houston Money Week. I would encourage people to go out to houstonmoneyweek.org to find a calendar of events. Even though it's called Houston Money Week and it's from the 1st to the 8th, we have financial literacy events available throughout Houston and the Gulf Coast area at no charge. These are free workshops and seminars all through the month of April. And when I got into the studio this morning, I wanted to double check on that to see what was going on. And I went to the website, houstonmoneyweek.org. I pulled up the calendar or the events page. And yep, we still have many events still going on throughout the entire month of April. April is always a big month when it comes to your finances because the first thing that pops into my head is taxes. And one of our, actually multiple partners of Houston Money Week are involved in what's called the VITA program, VITA program. And that is free tax preparation for anybody who makes under $58,000 a year. You're able to go to one of these nonprofit organizations that are involved in the VITA program and get your taxes done. So we are right here on the deadline. So I would encourage people that if you haven't had your taxes done yet, that can be a resource, and it is absolutely free. Find out more about that. You can go to www.houstonmoneyweek.org. You can also call 411-14111, which is the United Way's helpline here in Houston. If you have questions related to taxes, if you have questions related to community resources that are available to you, that United Way helpline is always a good resource to connect you to local nonprofit organizations in the Houston and Gulf Coast region in your zip code that are near you that will be able to provide assistance and help to you. With that, let's go ahead and get Andrew on the line here. Andrew, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Chris. Happy to be on.
Absolutely. Well, I always start the show the same way. I usually share just a little bit of your bio with listeners so that they can get to know you. Andrew Faas is an author, activist, revolutionist, philanthropist, and management advisor promoting psychologically healthy, safe, and fair workplaces. Before becoming a philanthropist, he led some of Canada's largest corporations for over 3 decades as a senior executive. He founded the Faas Foundation, which supports nonprofit organizations concerned with workplace well-being and other personal health and research endeavors. Currently, he's partnering with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence on a groundbreaking initiative, Emotion Revolution in the Workplace, which will revolutionize the way organizations operate, leveraging the power of emotional intelligence and Mental Health America to help reduce unnecessary stress factors at work and eliminate stigma around a condition that affects 1 in 5 adults. Again, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
And would you be able to share something outside of that bio for listeners to know just a little bit better?
Well, related to the topic of bullying, I offer a pretty unique perspective in so much that I was called out for being a bully early in my career, and quite frankly, it's the best lesson I've ever had that taught me that respect is a far more powerful motivator than fear. Throughout my career, with that lesson, I created customer-centric organizations, mostly in retail, where it was a very simple philosophy: treat your employees the way you want them to treat the customer. And later on in my career, I blew the whistle on a corrupt executive, and for an 18-month period, I was subject to the most extreme forms of bullying. So again, that gives me a pretty unique perspective on the topic.
Absolutely. That, and the book that you released this year, From Bully to BullsEye, Move Your Organization Out of the Line of Fire. We're going to do a deep dive here and ask you some questions around that, but I wanted to just, for the listeners here in Houston, if you were speaking with Andrew Faas right now, if you are interested in hearing more, he will be appearing at a local meeting here for Conscious Capitalism Houston on April 25th. And so I just wanted to start out by letting people know that they can get more by going there. But let's kind of do a deep dive into here. What is psychologically healthy, safe, and fair workplace?
And I would add to that productive.
Productive.
And in layman's terms, it is an environment that has the minimum amount of unnecessary stress factors. And, stress is there. And it is driven by the market, driven by competitive activity, and not something that you can just wave a wand and say stress is going to go away. And some stress is actually good. But unnecessary stress, like bullying or harassment or unfair performance reviews or undermining, is unnecessary stress factors. And they can be easily, and I say easily because I've done it, eliminated or at the very least reduced.
So what are some of the indicators that a culture of a business might be unhealthy? And as I asked this, we are on the week. Right now, this week, we had this stuff that happened with United Airlines, and for some reason, that image just appeared in my head here. But what are the indicators that a company's culture of a business might be unhealthy?
Well, when I go into an organization to do an assessment, the first indicator and the loudest indicator is the silence. And if people do not open up relative to what they're experiencing and how they feel about their work, how they feel about the relationships they have at work, and how they feel about the organization itself, that's a pretty strong indicator to me that there is something amiss. And an organization, to build trust in the organization, need to have a healthy space where people are free to express their viewpoints and issues. And if we look at Wells Fargo as an example, the cross-selling practice has been going on for years, and quite frankly, there's nothing wrong with that practice other than if you impose rigid and unreasonable goals where people have to cheat to achieve them. And this has been a practice that has been going on for years. And the issue is, like at Fox News and I believe at United, these things have been going on for years. And the question I always ask, well, why did it not come forward before it became exposed in the national media? Most cases, if not all cases, they are open secrets internal to the organization.
And that red flag, when you go in there and you see that silence where people are not open about the culture there, that's a red flag to you to know that this might be an unhealthy work situation here.
In the silence, it becomes the loudest, yes.
Well, let's kind of turn that on its head. How can employers promote a healthy workplace culture?
Well, by going through an exercise of building trust, and you build trust by being very forthright relative to what employees need to know about the business. And that is a constant communication that is required. And it needs to be two-way. The second most significant is how employees are assessed. And that is really targeting performance management systems that are out there, which are usually a once-a-year event dreaded by both the manager and the employee. And it does not allow for much interaction. And many cases, if not most cases, the preparation for it doesn't get the time and attention that it requires. So if you have a robust performance management system that's based on a simple premise of the ethic of reciprocity, which has the employer clearly outline to the employee what they expect from the employee, and test that for reasonableness. And in that test for reasonableness, ask the employee, okay, what do you need from me as a boss or the organization to be able to deliver on that? And then to have critical discussions on a regular basis to just talk about that. And what that does is eliminates the biases that exist. It eliminates subjectivity and ambiguity in the expectations, and it reduces the inherent, again, biases that people make judgment calls on. It also eliminates surprises, and it eliminates excuses. So it's a very healthy, forthright discussion or discussions that are held on a regular and ongoing basis. And through those discussions, you build up a level of respect and trust.
That makes a lot of sense coming from the employer's standpoint. What can an employee do if they feel that their culture is unhealthy?
Well, the advice I give people on that is don't try to deal with that alone. Ideally, people should go to a neutral party within the organization to express their concerns. And that neutral party should be human resources. Unfortunately, human resources have a horrible reputation relative to being able to be custodian, if you will, of an organization's culture. And people generally believe, and I talk generally because in 80% of the time where I've had people come to me or I've interviewed people on the topic of bullying, 80% of the time human resources are part of the problem versus part of the solution. So again, I say that ideally it should be human resources. But if people do not trust human resources, they should go to somebody within the organization who they can trust. And if there's nobody within the organization, then go outside the organization and seek people who can help. Whether it's an individual situation or an overall situation, then there are resources where people can go to seek advice and a strategy on how to handle it. If it's an overall situation, there is safety in numbers. That's what we're talking about relative to emotion revolution in the workplace. And in my book, I outline how people can organize themselves to bring situations forward in a positive, a factual way. Now, one of the groups that I suggested, or we suggested, that people may want to go to is the auditor, the external auditor to the organization. And I'm changing my tune on that a bit because recently KPMG and the lead of audit for the U.S. was recently fired for wrongdoing in terms of his role as the chief auditor of this auditing giant. And I wrote a blog on it recently just challenging, it's a sad state of affairs that we have auditors who are required to be audited.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. The idea is that they are a fiduciary or they are a neutral third party, and when they come back as having to be auditing the auditors, that is a sad state of affairs. Well, when we were talking about very general about being an unhealthy organization, but when we get very specific about the topic of bullying, what are the ramifications of bullying in the workplace going unchecked for the individual and for the company?
And for the community. So you mentioned in your introduction the Harvard-Stanford study where there's 120,000 deaths annually that may be attributable to workplace stress. But when you consider those are premature deaths, it makes it a number one killer. if that does not resonate with people in terms of asking themselves, do I lead an environment that could cause that kind of outcome, then there's nothing that we could do to convince them. But if organizations are looking to grow top and bottom line, and if organizations are looking to provide meaningful points of differentiation, and if organizations are trying to build their brand, having a toxic environment is a barrier to being able to do that. And research has shown that engaged employees are more productive. Research is also showing that unengaged employees do not go that extra mile. And that extra mile is not in terms of sweat, but that extra mile is speaking well about your organization and the brand, becoming ambassadors for the organization. That extra mile is coming up with ideas. And that extra mile is putting your hand up if they see something wrong and challenging the organization to prevent things like Wells Fargo, Flint, Michigan, Volkswagen, and the list goes on and on and on.
I like this. You've gone on record as saying that you believe that a psychological assessment should be an absolute requirement for anyone seeking a position in the C-suite, particularly potential CEOs. Can you tell us a little bit about why you believe that?
Well, it's something that I've practiced and insisted on all through my career. A psychological test conducted by a professional will tell you things that you're not able to capture in an interview or through referencing. And it will be an indicator as to how people will behave in the organization once they get there. And you can have the best and the brightest in terms of intellectual horsepower, but if they turn people off or they try to win at all costs, they become a huge liability to the organization. And in my book, I talk about an example where board of directors did not heed the advice of or the findings of a industrial psychologist who worked with that organization for many, many years. They hired a CEO, and within 18 months, that organization went down.
Wow. So they got the advice, but they didn't heed it. So.
They did not heed it. And they basically said, no, we want a tough bastard in here who's going to shake things up. And that's exactly what they got.
With hilarious results. No, just
shook things up to the point of its demise.
When we talk about bullying and just unhealthy workplaces in general, there are particular challenges to women, people of color, LGBTQ community, disabled. I work a lot with seniors. There's even ageism when it comes to being hired in the workplace. When it comes to the psychological effects of this, can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, whether you're part of some franchise group, when you're targeted, the impact psychologically on people is profound. The majority of people who are severely bullied suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And in most cases, people do not realize that they have been targeted until they're well into the situation. Because bullying, unlike in schools, bullying at work is far more subtle and it's far more calculated. So the aim of a bully, for a variety of reasons, and being a bigot is one of the big reasons that people are targeted. But regardless of the reason, the bully's intent is to get you out. And they will make life so difficult for you on a constant and regular basis that the target becomes, rather than the victim, becomes the villain. Because after going through this ongoing harassment and abuse, the attitude of the employee shifts from having a good or neutral attitude to being an employee with a bad attitude. You hear the term so often, a disgruntled employee. It also affects their performance. And when that happens, it gives the bully the ammunition to deal with that person.
We're about 5 minutes away to the end of the show here, but I wanted to let listeners know that you will be here in Houston on April 25th. You will be at a meeting for conscious capitalism. If you like what you're hearing today, you can join this meeting to hear Andrew talk about this topic and much, much more. Now, when it comes to, you have an organization, a foundation called the Faas Foundation, and you work with companies, organizations, institutions to create psychologically healthy workplaces. How do you do that?
Well, we're doing it in partnership with two groups. One is the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and the other is Mental Health America. And the approach we're taking on it is very evidence-based and really cracking the code to understanding the relationship between culture and performance. Performance includes innovation and creativity and people being comfortable in expressing their viewpoints and issues. We're doing a major study, and we've done one with 20,000 people, and what we're capturing is why or how people feel about the work they do, how people feel about the relationships they have at work, and how people feel about the organization. But more importantly, finding out why people feel the way they do and the impact that that's having on the organization. And we're still in the process of analyzing this, but we found something pretty significant, asking the question, do people make the organization, or does the organization make the people? And the answer is both. And determining the impacts, positive and negative, that each has on each other. But it's also a bit of a microcosm on what's happening in the world today and what happened in other periods, i.e. the early 30s and the early 50s in the U.S. Early 30s in Germany, early 50s in the U.S. And the question is, why did people behave the way they did as bystanders? Understanding that, we can provide for some preventative solutions, evidence-based solutions, obviously related to the workplace, but quite frankly, it applies to society in general.
Andrew, we are right here at the end of the show, and I want to thank you for coming on today. For listeners who enjoyed Andrew, you can get his book through, now that's available through Amazon.com?
Yes, it is.
You can get his book through Amazon.com. And is there a good website for listeners to find out more about you?
Yes, Andrew Faas, that's Andrew, Faas.com.
Perfect. And I know I've mentioned that you are going to be here in Houston for the Conscious Capitalism Houston meeting on April 25th at 7:30 to 9 a.m. If you're interested in finding out more about Andrew, you'll also have this information on the podcast notes once the podcast is published.